Lieutenant Von Hayes adjusted his uniform collar and tried not to laugh at the absurdity of his situation. Here he was, standing outside Classroom Delta 9 of the most prestigious military academy in known space, holding a reinforced transport case that weighed more than most sentient beings. Before we begin, YouTube shows me that 93% of you haven't subscribed yet. Subscribing is free, it really supports our community, and I'd love for you to be part of it. Also, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. The case rattled softly as its occupants shifted inside, and Vaughn could hear the distinctive huffing sounds that meant they were getting impatient. "Comfort animals," he muttered under his breath, shaking his head. "Right." The door slid open with a pneumatic hiss, and Vaughn stepped into what could only be described as the galaxy's most adorable war room. 23 desks arranged in a perfect semicircle, each one occupied by a cadet from a different species, and each desk sporting what looked like a collection of living plushie toys. The Centaurian cadet, easily identifiable by her gossamer wings and the way light seemed to bend around her, had 3 cloud sprites floating lazily above her workspace. The creatures looked like cotton balls made of starlight, pulsing gently with bioluminescent patterns that probably translated to "pet me" in whatever language cloud sprites spoke. 2 desks over, an Andromedan was gently stroking what appeared to be a silkworm the size of a house cat. The creature's melodic humming filled the air with sounds so soothing that half the class looked ready to fall asleep. Its iridescent fur shifted through the entire spectrum, creating a light show that would have made any Earth concert jealous. But the real showstopper was the Crystalline Federation representative, whose desk hosted a small herd of what looked like living gemstones. The creatures chimed softly as they moved, their translucent bodies catching the classroom's light and throwing rainbow patterns across the walls. One of them had apparently decided that the cadet's stylus was a suitable perch and was now balanced on top of it, creating a gentle wind chime symphony every time the cadet tried to take notes. Vaughn surveyed the menagerie with growing amusement. Everywhere he looked, there were creatures designed by evolution, or genetic engineering, to be as non-threatening as possible. Fuzzy things, sparkly things, things that made happy noises, things that probably existed solely to be cuddled. And then there was his transport case. "Ah, Lieutenant Hayes!" The voice came from the front of the classroom, where a tall, elegant figure was arranging holographic displays with practiced efficiency. Professor Nexum stood nearly 8 feet tall, with skin that looked like it had been carved from polished obsidian. 6 eyes arranged in 2 neat rows gave her an almost crystalline appearance, though the way those eyes tracked movement suggested predatory instincts that had been refined over millions of years of evolution. "You're just in time," Nexum continued, her voice carrying the subtle harmonics that marked her as a member of the Vorthon collective. We're about to begin today's lesson on interspecies emotional bonding through companion-creature interaction. 23 pairs of alien eyes, some compound, some multiple, some glowing, turned to focus on Vaughn and his conspicuous lack of visible cute animals. The Andromedan's silkworm stopped humming. The crystalline creatures paused their chiming. Even the cloud sprites seemed to dim slightly as they waited to see what the human had brought. Vaughn walked to the only empty desk, naturally positioned in the back corner, because apparently even advanced galactic civilizations believed in traditional classroom hierarchies, and set his transport case down with a solid thunk that made several cadets flinch. "Now then," Professor Nexum said, her multiple eyes tracking between Vaughn and the case with obvious curiosity. "As you all know, The ability to form emotional bonds with other species is crucial for any officer hoping to serve in the Galactic Defense Force. In combat situations, trust and emotional stability can mean the difference between victory and catastrophe. She gestured toward the assembled menagerie of adorable creatures. Your companion animals represent the pinnacle of evolutionary development in terms of emotional support and stress reduction. The Centaurian cloud sprites, for instance, have been bred for over 2,000 years to provide optimal psychological comfort during high-stress situations. The Centaurian Cadet beamed with pride as her cloud sprites performed what looked like a synchronized swimming routine in mid-air. The Andromedan harmony worms, Nexum continued, produce sonic frequencies that have been scientifically proven to reduce cortisol levels and promote tactical thinking. More preening from the Andromedan corner. And of course, the crystalline collective's resonance gems provide both emotional stability and enhanced cognitive function through their unique vibrational patterns. The crystalline creatures chimed in what sounded suspiciously like applause. Professor Nexum's 6 eyes fixed on Vaughn with laser precision. Which brings us to Earth's contribution to interspecies companion animal research. Lieutenant Hayes, would you care to introduce us to humanity's approach to emotional bonding? The classroom fell silent except for the gentle background noise of purring, humming, and chiming. 23 cadets leaned forward in their seats, clearly expecting something fluffy and harmless to emerge from the transport case. Vaughn stood up slowly, suppressing the grin that threatened to break across his face. Well, Professor, Earth animals evolved a bit differently than most species companions. He placed his hands on the transport case's release mechanism. See, we don't really do safe when it comes to bonding. We figured out a long time ago that if you want real loyalty, real trust, you need to earn it from something that could kill you if it wanted to. The case's locks disengaged with a series of mechanical clicks that sounded unnaturally loud in the suddenly tense classroom. Meet Kodiak and Denali, Vaughn said, lifting the case's lid. North American grizzly bear cubs. 6 months old, 300 pounds each, and raised by hand since they were orphaned in a forest fire. What emerged from the transport case was not cute in any traditional sense. Kodiak climbed out first, a mass of dark brown fur, muscle, and curiosity that immediately began investigating his new surroundings with the confident swagger of an apex predator. His sister Denali followed, slightly smaller, but with eyes that held an intelligence that made several cadets involuntarily step backward. The silence that followed was deafening. The cloud sprites stopped floating. The harmony worm's song died mid-note. Even the crystalline creatures seemed to have forgotten how to chime. Both cubs turned their massive heads toward the class, and Vaughn could practically hear the collective intake of breath as 23 alien cadets got their first close look at Earth's idea of a companion animal. Fascinating, Professor Nexum whispered, all 6 of her eyes wide with what looked like equal parts horror and scientific curiosity. Absolutely fascinating. Kodiak chose that moment to let out a soft woof of greeting, and 3 cadets immediately activated their desk's emergency containment shields. Professor Nexum's obsidian features went through what could generously be called a spectrum of emotions, starting somewhere around academic fascination and rapidly progressing toward existential dread. All 6 of her eyes remained locked on the cubs as they began their casual exploration of the classroom, their massive paws making soft padding sounds on the polished floor. "Lieutenant," she said, her voice carrying the careful tone of someone trying very hard not to provoke a dangerous situation. "When the Academy requested that cadets bring companion animals for bonding exercises, I believe the implicit understanding was that these creatures would be domesticated. Vaughn scratched Kodiak behind the ears, eliciting a rumbling sound of contentment that vibrated through the floor and made several desks rattle. "Oh, they're domesticated, Professor. Hand-raised from cubs. Bottle-fed, house-trained, the whole 9 yards." Denali had apparently decided that the Crystalline Federation Cadets desk looked interesting and was now investigating the collection of resonance gems with the focused attention of a scientist examining new specimens. The gems chiming had taken on a distinctly panicked quality. That's Vexani's desk," Professor Nexum managed, watching as the 300-pound cub delicately sniffed at creatures that weighed roughly the same as paperclips. Cadet Vexani, whose compound eyes were currently dilated to roughly twice their normal size, had pressed herself so far back in her chair that she was practically horizontal. Her gossamer wings were vibrating at a frequency that suggested imminent flight or complete nervous breakdown. "She's just curious," Vaughn said conversationally, as if discussing the weather rather than watching an apex predator investigate alien life forms. "Denali's always been the explorer of the pair. Very gentle, though. Haven't lost a single pet sitter yet." "Yet," Vexani squeaked. Meanwhile, Kodiak had discovered the Andromedan cadet's harmony worm and was studying it with the intense focus that bears typically reserved for salmon runs or honey trees. The silkworm had gone completely silent and was doing its best impression of a very colorful, very terrified statue. "Kodiak, leave Ulvor's friend alone," Vaughn said mildly. The bear cub looked back at his human, huffed what sounded suspiciously like disappointment, and padded away from the desk. Cadet Ulvor, whose aquatic features had taken on a distinctly pale green tinge, fumbled for the emergency moisture controls on his environmental suit. "How?" Professor Nexum asked, her voice climbing toward the upper registers of Vorthan vocal range. "Exactly does one bond with creatures that are biologically designed to hunt and kill?" Vaughn grinned, and for the first time since entering the classroom, he looked genuinely excited. "That's the beautiful part, Professor. You can't fake trust with a predator. They smell fear, they sense weakness, and they absolutely know when you're lying to them." He walked over to where Denali was still examining the resonance gems, her massive head tilted in concentration. Without hesitation, Vaughn knelt beside the cub and began running his hands through her thick fur, checking behind her ears, examining her paws, performing what looked like a routine health inspection. "See, every other species in this room has bonded with creatures that were bred to make them feel safe," Vaughn continued, his voice taking on the cadence of a lecturer who actually enjoyed his subject. "But Earth figured out something different a long time ago. We learned that real safety, real trust, comes from knowing that something incredibly dangerous has chosen not to hurt you." Denali rolled onto her back, exposing her belly to Vaughn's inspection, a display of complete vulnerability that made several cadets gasp audibly. "A cloud sprite will comfort you, because that's what it was designed to do," Vaughn said, scratching the cub's belly while she made contented rumbling noises. "A harmony worm will sing to you because its entire evolutionary purpose is to be soothing. But a grizzly bear will protect you because it has decided, as an individual thinking creature, that you are worth protecting." Kodiak had apparently grown bored with his investigation of the classroom and wandered back to his human, flopping down beside Denali with the casual confidence of a creature that had never encountered anything it considered a legitimate threat. "The trust has to be earned," Vaughn continued, now sitting, cross-legged between two bears who were collectively heavier than most planetary shuttles. Every single day. You can't demand loyalty from an apex predator. You have to prove you deserve it. To demonstrate his point, Vaughn reached into his uniform pocket and produced what looked like a standard military ration pack. Both cubs' heads snapped to attention with the laser focus of creatures who had strong opinions about food distribution. "Kodiak," Vaughn said firmly. "Wait." The male cub froze mid-motion, every muscle taut with anticipation but perfectly still. "Denali," Vaughn continued. "Wait." The female cub's eyes never left the ration pack, but she remained motionless except for the tip of her tail, which twitched once before going still. Vaughn opened the ration pack with deliberate slowness, the rustling of packaging sounding unnaturally loud in the dead-silent classroom. He divided the contents into 2 equal portions, then looked at each cub in turn. "Kodiak." "Okay." The male cub moved forward and delicately took his portion from Vaughn's hand, his massive jaws careful not to so much as brush against human fingers. "Denali?" "Okay." The process repeated with mechanical precision. Controlled power, perfect obedience, absolute trust flowing in both directions. Professor Nexum's 6 eyes were now wide enough to be classified as a medical condition. That level of behavioral control, the neurological pathways required for such complex emotional bonding. "Lieutenant, do you understand the implications of what you're demonstrating?" Vaughn shrugged, scratching behind Kodiak's ears as the cub finished his meal. "Back home, we call it pack mentality. These 2 don't just see me as their caretaker, they see me as their pack leader. And in a pack, everyone looks out for everyone else." "But the risk," Vexani whispered, her compound eyes still tracking every movement the cubs made. "What if they decide you're not worthy of leadership? What if their instincts override their training?" Vaughn's grin turned predatory in a way that made him look remarkably similar to his companions. "Then I'd better make sure I stay worthy, hadn't I?" The classroom fell silent again, but this time the quality of the silence had changed. Instead of fear, there was something that looked suspiciously like awe on several alien faces. Even the various companion animals seemed to sense that something significant had just occurred. The cloud sprites were pulsing with slower, more thoughtful patterns. The harmony worm had resumed its song, but in a lower, more contemplative key, and the resonance gems were chiming in perfect harmony. Professor Nexum was making rapid notes on her holographic display, her multiple eyes darting between her data and the peaceful scene of a human sitting casually between 2 creatures that could tear apart a battle tank. "Extraordinary," she murmured. "Absolutely extraordinary. The psychological profiles alone, the stress indicators. Lieutenant, I don't suppose you'd be willing to participate in some extended research protocols?" Before Vaughn could answer, the classroom's emergency lighting system activated, bathing everything in pulsing red light. A klaxon alarm began wailing, the kind of sound specifically designed to trigger fight-or-flight responses across multiple species. Both grizzly cubs were on their feet instantly, flanking Vaughn in a protective formation that spoke of instincts honed over millions of years of evolution. Their playful demeanor had vanished, replaced by the focused alertness of apex predators sensing danger. 23 alien cadets and their companion animals looked around in confusion and growing panic. But Vaughn just stood up slowly, his eyes scanning the classroom with tactical precision, while his hands came to rest on the cub's shoulders. "Now this," he said quietly, "should be interesting." The classroom door exploded inward with enough force to embed fragments of reinforced alloy into the opposite wall. Through the smoking breach stepped a figure that immediately commanded every predatory instinct in the room. Admiral Ketara, whose battle-scarred exoskeleton bore the distinctive marks of someone who had personally negotiated peace treaties with plasma cannons. Her 4 arms moved with mechanical precision as she surveyed the scene, 2 carrying military-grade pulse rifles, while the others manipulated tactical displays that materialized in the air around her. Behind her, a squad of Academy security personnel took defensive positions, their weapons trained not on the students, but on the ventilation grates and ceiling panels. "Nobody move," the Admiral commanded, her voice carrying the kind of authority that made even apex predators consider their life choices. "This classroom is under quarantine protocol." Professor Nexum's 6 eyes narrowed dangerously. "Admiral, what is the meaning of this interruption?" "I was conducting a routine bonding exercise." "Routine?" Ketara's mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter or threat assessment. "Professor, your routine exercise just became the galaxy's most expensive field test. We have confirmed void wraith infiltration in this facility." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Void wraiths were the stuff of military nightmares, shape-shifting entities that existed somewhere between energy and matter, capable of mimicking any organic form and feeding on the psychic emanations of terror. They were perfect predators in their own right, and the fact that they had somehow breached Academy security meant that someone had badly underestimated the threat. Vaughn felt both cubs press closer against his legs, their massive forms trembling not with fear, but with barely contained aggression. Grizzly bears might not understand interstellar politics, but they absolutely understood when their pack was being threatened. "The Academy has been monitoring suspicious energy signatures for the past week," Admiral Ketara continued, her tactical displays showing heat signatures and movement patterns throughout the building. "What we initially dismissed as equipment malfunctions were actually void wraith reconnaissance probes. They've been studying our students, learning their behavioral patterns, preparing for something." Vexani's gossamer wings had begun to flutter rapidly, a sure sign of Centaurian panic response. But why? What could they possibly want with Academy students? "Information," the Admiral replied grimly. "The void wraiths don't just mimic physical forms, they absorb memories, tactical knowledge, everything that makes a person who they are. A single wraith could infiltrate the highest levels of Galactic Defense Command if it had access to the right minds." She gestured toward the assembled students with one of her secondary arms. 23 of the most promising military candidates from across known space, all conveniently gathered in one location. From their perspective, this classroom represents the ultimate intelligence bonanza. Cadet Ulivor's environmental suit was now cycling through its full range of defensive protocols, his aquatic features visible through the helmet's transparent aluminum. "How do we know they haven't already replaced some of us? If they can perfectly mimic any organic form." "Because," Admiral Ketara interrupted, "void wraiths have one crucial limitation. They can replicate appearance, behavior, even personality, but they cannot replicate genuine emotional bonds with other living creatures. The psychic resonance of true companionship is something they fundamentally cannot understand or duplicate." Professor Nexum's obsidian features shifted into an expression of dawning comprehension. "The companion animal exercise. You weren't just testing our bonding abilities. You were using our pets as void wraith detectors." "Exactly." The Admiral's tactical displays shifted to show psychic resonance patterns throughout the room. Every genuine student-companion pair generates a distinctive emotional signature. Void wraiths trying to mimic that bond create discordant patterns. As if summoned by her words, The air above the classroom began to shimmer and twist. What had appeared to be empty space suddenly coalesced into writhing shadows that moved with predatory intelligence. The void wraiths had been there all along, hanging from the ceiling like psychic bats, observing and learning. The room exploded into chaos. Cloud sprites scattered in all directions, their bioluminescent panic lighting turning the air into a disco of terror. The harmony worm's soothing song became a shriek of pure fear that made several cadets cover their auditory organs. Resonance gems shattered against walls as their owners fled in every direction at once. But not everyone ran. Vaughn dropped into a combat crouch, both hands coming to rest on his cub's massive shoulders. Kodiak and Denali needed no further instruction. 6 months of hand-rearing had created a bond that functioned below the level of conscious thought. They moved as a unit, the human providing tactical awareness, while the bears brought raw predatory power to bear. The first void wraith to descend found itself facing 300 pounds of irritated grizzly bear moving at 30 miles per hour. Kodiak's massive paw connected with the entity's semi-corporeal form, and the resulting impact sent both combatants tumbling across the classroom in a tangle of fur, claws, and screaming shadow. "Form defensive positions," Admiral Katara commanded, her pulse rifles tracking multiple targets simultaneously. "Protect your companions at all costs." Most of the alien cadets were still processing the concept of fighting instead of fleeing, but Vaughn was already 3 moves ahead. He rolled behind an overturned desk, Denali matching his movement with the fluid grace of a creature born to hunt in coordinated packs. From their improvised cover, he assessed the tactical situation with the cold calculation that had gotten him through a dozen different battlefields. 5 void wraiths, maybe 6. Hard to tell when they kept shifting between corporeal and energy states. 3 exit points, all compromised. 23 panicked students scattered across the room like organic shrapnel. And in the middle of it all, 2 grizzly bears treating the whole situation like the world's most dangerous game of tag. Kodiak had managed to pin his wraith against the far wall, and was systematically reducing it to component particles with the kind of focused aggression that made other apex predators reevaluate their career choices. The entity's psychic screams were audible across multiple spectrums, a sound that made even the Academy's trained security personnel flinch. "They can't phase through living tissue," Vaughn shouted over the chaos, realizing something that the wraiths themselves probably hadn't expected. "Physical contact disrupts their molecular cohesion." Professor Nex-Yum, who had been backing slowly toward the emergency exit, suddenly stopped retreating. Her 6 eyes focused on Vaughn with laser intensity. "Are you suggesting that direct physical combat is more effective than energy weapons?" "I'm suggesting," Vaughn replied, watching Denali intercept a wraith that had been stalking toward the terrified Vexani, "that sometimes the old ways work better than the new ones." The female cub grabbed the shadow entity in her massive jaws and shook it like a chew toy. The wraith's attempts to phase through her were met with the immutable reality of 6-inch canine teeth and jaw pressure measured in tons per square inch. Turns out that millions of years of evolution had equipped grizzly bears to handle threats that military science was still trying to understand. Admiral Katara's tactical displays were lighting up like festival decorations as she tracked the battle's progress. Impossible. The energy readings. "Lieutenant, your animals are generating some kind of psychic interference field." "Not psychic," Vaughn corrected, rolling to a new position as another wraith descended from the ceiling. "Emotional. The bond between pack members creates a resonance that the wraiths can't penetrate or duplicate." To prove his point, he whistled a sharp, two-tone command. Both cubs immediately disengaged from their targets and converged on his position, moving with the synchronized precision of a military unit. The void wraiths, expecting to face scattered individual targets, suddenly found themselves confronting a coordinated pack that fought with instincts honed over millions of years. Kodiak took point, his massive form serving as both battering ram and mobile fortress. Denali flanked left, using her smaller size and greater agility to harry the wraiths from unexpected angles. And Vaughn moved between them, providing tactical coordination and covering their flanks with the kind of trust that could only exist between pack members who would literally die for each other. The tide of battle began to shift. Void wraiths were individually superior to almost any organic opponent, but they had evolved as solitary hunters. They had no experience fighting creatures that moved as extensions of a single tactical mind, no instincts for dealing with opponents who trusted each other completely. Cadet Vexani, who had spent the first part of the battle cowering behind her desk, suddenly straightened up. Her compound eyes tracked the movement of her scattered cloud sprites, and something clicked into place. The resonance pattern. If we can synchronize our companions' emotional frequencies. She began making a series of rapid clicking sounds, a form of Centaurian communication that operated below the range of most species' hearing. Her cloud sprites, despite their obvious terror, began responding to her calls. One by one, they broke off their panicked flight patterns and started moving in coordinated formations. Ulvor, watching from inside his environmental suit, began generating the complex harmonic frequencies that his species used for echolocation. His harmony worm, picking up on the sounds, shifted its own song to match. The combined effect created standing waves of sound that seemed to disrupt the wraith's ability to maintain corporeal form. Even the scattered resonance gems, those that hadn't been shattered in the initial panic, began responding to their owner's desperate attempts at coordination. Their crystalline chiming took on new patterns, creating interference frequencies that made the void wraith's movements sluggish and predictable. Professor Nexum, watching the battle unfold from her position near the emergency exit, felt her scientific worldview undergoing rapid recalibration. Fascinating. The human approach to pack bonding is creating a cascade effect among the other species. They're learning to coordinate their emotional resonances in real time. Admiral Ketara's mandibles were clicking rapidly as she processed the tactical implications. Lieutenant Vaughn, can you maintain this coordination pattern while advancing toward the exit? Vaughn looked around the classroom, taking in the scattered students, the embattled void wraiths, and his two cubs, who were still treating the whole situation like an extremely violent game of fetch. Depends. How attached are you to keeping this room intact? Property damage is acceptable, the Admiral replied without hesitation. Casualty reports are not. Vaughn's grin was pure predator. Kodiak, Denali, time to show these shadow puppets why Earth is still in the things that will eat you business. Both cubs looked at their pack leader with expressions of joyful anticipation. After 6 months of careful socialization and gentle training, they were finally being asked to do what grizzly bears did best. But before the final assault could begin, something unexpected happened. The remaining void wraiths, instead of continuing their individual attacks, began to coalesce into a single massive entity. Their shadowy forms merged and twisted, creating something that looked less like a collection of predators and more like a living nightmare made of pure malevolence. Collective Consciousness Protocol, Admiral Katara barked, her weapons tracking the new threat. They're pooling their psychic energy. Everyone maintain your companion bonds. If that thing breaks our emotional resonance patterns, we're all dead. The merged wraith entity pulsed with dark energy, its form shifting between solid matter and writhing shadow. When it spoke, its voice came from everywhere at once, a sound that seemed to bypass the ears entirely and speak directly to the fear centers of every organic brain in the room. "Fascinating creatures," it hissed, multiple voices layering over each other in a symphony of menace. "The human speaks of pack bonds, but we see deeper truths. We see the fear beneath your confidence, the doubt that gnaws at every supposed certainty. Your bears trust you now, little human. But what happens when that trust is broken?" The entity began projecting psychic images directly into everyone's minds. Visions of Vaughn abandoning his cubs, of the bears turning on their human companions, of trust dissolving into betrayal and violence. Several cadets stumbled as the false memories crashed into their consciousness like psychological tsunamis. But Vaughn just laughed. "You really don't get it, do you?" he said, scratching behind Kodiak's ears while the cub rumbled with contentment. "You're trying to break a bond by showing us images of it being broken. But that's not how pack mentality works." He stood up slowly, both cubs flanking him as he faced down the massive wraith entity. "See, the thing about real trust is that it doesn't exist because everything is perfect. It exists because you choose it every single day, even when things go wrong." To demonstrate his point, Vaughn reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device that looked suspiciously like a military-grade sonic disruptor. "Kodiak, Denali, this is going to be loud and scary, but I need you to trust me, okay?" Both cubs looked at the device, then at their human, then back at the device. Their body language spoke volumes. They clearly didn't like what was about to happen, but they trusted Vaughn more than they feared the unknown. "That's pack loyalty," Vaughn explained to the wraith entity, his finger hovering over the activation switch. "It's not about eliminating fear. It's about choosing trust, even when you're afraid." The sonic disruptor activated with a sound that seemed to tear reality apart at the molecular level. Every piece of loose equipment in the room began vibrating, the windows cracked in perfect geometric patterns, and several species' auditory organs went into protective shutdown mode. Both grizzly cubs flinched visibly, their massive forms trembling with the instinctive urge to flee from a sound that triggered every evolutionary alarm they possessed. But they stayed. They stayed because their pack leader had asked them to. The void wraith entity, caught completely off guard by the sonic assault, began to lose cohesion. Its merged form started separating back into individual components, each one struggling to maintain physical coherence against the disruptor's frequency patterns. "Now!" Vaughn shouted over the mechanical screaming. "While they're separated, everyone coordinate your companion bonds and hit them with everything you've got." What followed was the most chaotic display of interspecies cooperation in Academy history. Vexani's cloud sprites formed attack formations that would have made fighter pilots weep with envy, their bioluminescent patterns creating strobing light shows that confused the wraith's visual tracking systems. Olivor's harmony worm shifted its song into frequencies that made the shadow entities clutch their heads in agony, while the surviving resonance gems created sonic barriers that herded the wraiths into kill zones. And in the center of it all, Vaughn and his cubs moved like a single organism, exploiting every opening that the coordinated alien companions created. Kodiak's massive claws raked through wraith forms, while Denali used her smaller size to dart in and out of combat, striking vital points before the entities could react. "Impossible!" Professor Nexum shouted, her 6 eyes tracking the battle with scientific fascination despite the mortal danger. the coordination patterns, the emotional synchronization. You're creating a Gestalt consciousness. Not Gestalt, Vaughn corrected, ducking under a wraith's claws while Kodiak bull-rushed another shadow entity into the wall. Pack mentality scales up. Get enough individuals thinking as a group, and the group starts thinking as an individual. The Void Wraiths, designed to exploit individual fears and break isolated prey, found themselves facing something their entire evolutionary history had never prepared them for. A coordinated pack that fought with the efficiency of a single mind distributed across multiple bodies. One by one, the shadow entities began to fall. Some were torn apart by bear claws, others disrupted by harmonic frequencies, and several more simply dissolved when their psychic foundations were overwhelmed by the sheer emotional coherence of the coordinated pack. Admiral Ketara, watching the battle unfold through her tactical displays, felt her mandibles clicking in what could only be described as professional admiration. "Lieutenant Vaughn, remind me to recommend you for advanced tactical training. This coordination pattern, we could revolutionize small unit tactics across the entire defense force." "Just doing what comes naturally, Admiral," Vaughn replied, watching as the last void wraith dissolved into component particles. "Earth figured out pack hunting a long time ago. We just scaled it up a bit." The sonic disruptor powered down, leaving the classroom in sudden, ringing silence. 23 alien cadets stood among the wreckage of desks and scattered equipment, their various companion animals slowly returning to their normal behavioral patterns. Cloud sprites resumed their gentle floating. The harmony worm's song shifted back to soothing frequencies, and the surviving resonance gems chimed with what sounded suspiciously like victory fanfares. But the real victory was written in the faces of the students themselves. Every alien cadet was looking at their companion animal with new understanding, seeing them not just as sources of comfort, but as potential partners in something larger than themselves. The final phase of the battle was about to begin. The silence that followed the Void Wraith's destruction lasted exactly long enough for everyone to take one collective breath before Admiral Ketara's tactical displays began screaming warnings in languages that most organic beings weren't equipped to pronounce. "Secondary infiltration detected," she announced, her forearms moving across control surfaces with mechanical precision. "Basement levels, maintenance tunnels, and, oh, wonderful, they've breached the reactor containment areas." Professor Nexum's obsidian features shifted into an expression that would have been panic on a less composed species. "Admiral, if void wraiths compromise the Academy's power core, the resulting psychic explosion would turn every student in this facility into a mindless feeding ground for shadow entities," Ketara finished grimly. "Yes, Professor, I'm aware of the implications." Vaughn looked down at his cubs, both of whom were currently investigating the smoking remains of void wraith entities with the focused attention of forensic scientists. "How many more of these things are we dealing with, Admiral?" "Unknown. Could be dozens, could be hundreds. Void wraiths reproduce through psychic fission. The more fear they generate, the more entities they spawn." The Admiral's mandibles clicked rapidly as she processed incoming data streams. "What I do know is that they've been planning this assault for weeks, possibly months. This wasn't random opportunism. This was a coordinated military strike." Cadet Vexani, her gossamer wings still trembling slightly from the recent battle, raised one delicate hand. "Admiral, if they've been studying us for so long, won't they be prepared for our companion bonding tactics?" "Ordinarily, yes," Ketara replied, her tactical displays shifting to show building schematics and entity movement patterns. But they studied you as individuals with individual pets. They have no data on coordinated pack behavior because, until 15 minutes ago, it had never been successfully demonstrated in a multi-species environment. Olivor's environmental suit was cycling through what looked like excited anticipation protocols. You mean we have a tactical advantage that they can't counter because they don't know it exists? Exactly. The Admiral turned to face Vaughn directly, all four of her eyes focusing on him with laser intensity. Lieutenant, I'm going to ask something that violates approximately 16 different Academy safety protocols. Are your animals capable of operating in hostile environments beyond this classroom? Kodiak chose that moment to let out a rumbling vocalization that sounded like a diesel engine being questioned about its personal commitment to violence. Denali responded with a huffing sound that clearly translated to, "Try us." "I think that's your answer, Admiral," Vaughn said, scratching behind both Cubs' ears simultaneously. "But we're not going down there alone. If this pack mentality thing really works on a larger scale, then we're going to need everyone." "Absolutely not," Professor Nexum interjected, her six eyes wide with academic horror. "These are students, not combat specialists. You're proposing to take 23 of the galaxy's most promising young minds into a nest of psychic predators." "I'm proposing," Vaughn corrected, "to take 23 pack members into a situation where individual tactics will get everyone killed. But coordinated group behavior might actually save the Academy." Admiral Katara was quiet for several long moments, her tactical processors running calculations that involved variables no military computer had ever been designed to handle. Finally, she spoke. "Lieutenant Vaughn is correct. Standard combat doctrine against void wraiths involves overwhelming firepower and individual protective measures. But if they've infiltrated the power core, energy weapons become liabilities. One stray shot could trigger a cascade failure that turns this entire moon into a psychic beacon." She gestured toward the assembled students and their various companion animals. "However, what you've demonstrated here suggests that emotional resonance bonding might be more effective than energy weapons anyway. The question is whether you can maintain pack cohesion while moving through hostile territory." Vaughn looked around the classroom, taking in the faces of 23 alien cadets who had just discovered that their cute pets could be weapons of war. There's only one way to find out. What followed was the most bizarre military briefing in galactic history. Admiral Katara projected holographic maps of the Academy's lower levels while explaining void wraith behavioral patterns to an audience that included 2 grizzly bears, a collection of glowing cloud sprites, a harmony worm that had apparently decided the whole situation was fascinating rather than terrifying, and several crystalline creatures that were chiming in what sounded like tactical harmony. "The reactor core is located 6 levels down," the Admiral explained, her displays showing access routes and known wraith concentrations. Standard Academy security protocols would involve sealing all access points and waiting for orbital bombardment clearance. But with students still in the facility, that option is inadvisable. Cadet Ulvor's aquatic features were cycling through what looked like tactical analysis patterns. "Admiral, my species has experience with coordinated hunting in 3-dimensional environments, if we can adapt those techniques to corridor-based movement. And Centaurian cloud sprites are naturally suited for reconnaissance," Vexani added, her compound eyes tracking the movement patterns of her floating companions. "They can scout ahead and provide early warning of wraith concentrations." The Resonance Gem owner, a crystalline cadet whose name consisted entirely of harmonic frequencies, contributed a series of chimes that Professor Nexum translated as tactical suggestions for using sonic interference to disrupt void wraith cohesion patterns. Vaughn listened to the planning session with growing amazement. 20 minutes ago, these students had been cowering behind desks, while their comfort animals scattered in panic. Now they were discussing advanced military tactics with the confidence of seasoned combat veterans. Pack mentality, he muttered to himself. It really does scale up. The descent through the Academy's maintenance levels was like moving through a horror movie designed by military engineers. Every corridor was identical, every junction looked the same, and the emergency lighting cast shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. The only sounds were the soft padding of bear paws on metal flooring, and the gentle harmonics of various companion animals maintaining formation. But what would have been a nightmare scenario for individual soldiers became something almost elegant when approached as pack behavior. Vexani's cloud sprites ranged ahead in scouting formations, their bioluminescent signals providing tactical intelligence about wraith positions. Ulivores, harmony worm, generated standing wave patterns that confused enemy sensing abilities, while the resonance gems created acoustic barriers that channeled the wraiths into predetermined kill zones. And in the center of the formation, Vaughn and his cubs served as the pack's heavy assault element, moving with the coordinated precision that had kept their species alive through ice ages and asteroid impacts. The first major engagement came at Level 3, where a concentration of void wraiths had established what could generously be called a nest. The shadow entities had learned from their earlier defeat and were no longer operating as individuals. They moved in coordinated groups, using pack tactics of their own. But they were still thinking like individual predators cooperating temporarily. They had no concept of true pack mentality, where 23 separate minds could function as facets of a single tactical consciousness. The battle was over in less than 90 seconds. Coordinated sonic attacks disrupted wraith cohesion, while bear claws and crystalline resonance patterns tore apart anything that maintained physical form. The surviving shadow entities fled deeper into the facility's bowels, carrying with them the growing awareness that they had seriously underestimated their prey. Reactor core, Admiral Ketara announced, through the tactical communication network. Final level. And according to my sensors, every surviving void wraith in the facility is waiting for you down there. Vaughn looked around at his pack, because that's what they were now. 23 different species united by bonds that transcended biology or evolutionary history. They had faced the galaxy's most feared predators and emerged victorious through nothing more than the radical concept of trusting each other completely. "Well," he said, scratching behind Kodiak's ears while Denali investigated what looked suspiciously like void wraith claw marks on the corridor walls. "I guess it's time to find out if Earth's approach to problem-solving works on an industrial scale." The final descent began, leading toward a confrontation that would either save the Academy or provide the void wraiths with enough psychic energy to spawn across half the galaxy. But for the first time since the crisis began, Vaughn felt genuinely optimistic about their chances. After all, they had proven that pack mentality could overcome individual fear. Now they just had to prove it could overcome an entire species' worth of nightmares. The reactor core waited in the depths, along with whatever horrors the void wraiths had prepared. But they would face it together, as a pack, the way Earth had always faced its monsters, with absolute trust, tactical coordination, and two very large, very irritated grizzly bears.